non-trade programs. I'd like to welcome this morning Senator the Honourable Penny Wong, Minister for Foreign Affairs. Good morning, Minister.
Good morning.
And Ms Jane Adams, AOPSM, Secretary of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Good morning, Secretary, and to all your officers. Minister, do you have an opening statement?
I do.
You have the call.
Thank you very much, Chair. I welcome the opportunity to appear before this committee and to speak about the circumstances in which we find ourselves and the work that the portfolio is doing. Chair, Australia faces a world of growing challenges, and each day our assumptions are being tested. We live in a world of increasing strategic surprise, ever more certain and unpredictable. We see the devastating human toll of conflicts, including in Ukraine, Gaza and Sudan. Malign actors continue to engage in sabotage and terrorism. Bullies threaten to use nuclear weapons. Authoritarianism is spreading. Some countries are shifting alignment. High global inflation continues to put pressure on working people. Institutions we helped build are being eroded, and rules we helped write are being challenged. These factors compound threats to our own region from a changing climate, military build-up without transparency, and disruption of trade, as well as the risks inherent in great power competition. All up, Australians can see a scale of global challenges unprecedented since World War II. But we should be confident that we can meet these challenges, keep Australia's region secure, and keep the Australian people safe. Today I've released a snapshot of Australia's place in the world, summarising our foreign policy strategy and priorities. And what it clearly shows is that even though we face a time of growing uncertainty, Australia is well placed to protect our security, our stability and our prosperity. And we can do that by focusing on our region, where our interests are most at stake, investing not only in traditional but also in more diverse relationships and upholding international rules that protect us all. What Australians don't want in the face of these circumstances is reckless political games from people who claim to be leaders. We've been reminded of that just this week. The same people who left a massive vacuum in the Pacific, the same people who had no regard for the consequences for Australian exporters or for Chinese Australian communities, are at it again, trying to turn China into an election issue. We have been very clear that China is going to keep being China, just as Mr Dutton isn't going to stop being Mr Dutton. The man who once said it was inconceivable we wouldn't go to war is going to keep beating the drums of war. The Labor government will be calm and consistent, not reckless and arrogant. And let me remind the committee the mature and responsible way we have sought to deal with China. We set out to stabilise the relationship without compromising on Australian values or Australian interests. Stabilisation has never meant there would be no problems. It has always meant we should be able to engage directly with China to manage inevitable differences and problems without these problems derailing our ability to talk to each other, as was the case under Mr Morrison and Mr Dutton. And that is what we will keep doing, and it is what the Australian people expect of their government, engaging confidently, calmly and consistently, protecting our sovereignty and advancing our interests. That is what we have done in the case of both the unsafe and unprofessional interaction between the PLA-P8 and the extended deployment of a PLA-N task group near Australia. As the committee is aware, the Deputy Prime Minister has ensured the public is kept apprised of the situation. Defence have issued regular updates on its location, and the ADF has worked with the New Zealand Defence Force to monitor the task group. The task group issued an alert which was received by commercial aircraft in the vicinity on 21st February to a live firing exercise. Air Services Australia notified the ADF, and the New Zealand forces shadowing the task group also notified the ADF sometime later. Within hours of the live firing exercise, the Australian government made representations to China, seeking an explanation of why we were not provided advance notice. The Prime Minister and I agreed I should make direct representations to Foreign Minister Wang Yi in our meeting on Friday in South Africa. I made clear to Foreign Minister Wang that the lack of notice for the PLA-N's activities did not meet our expectations and was of deep concern. I said the Australian Defence Force would provide at least 12 hours notice in such circumstances. Chair, the Australian Government was in a position to raise our concerns directly with the Chinese Government at a high level less than a day after the exercise commenced. Some politicians seem to be insinuating that Australia is responsible for the PLA not providing more notice, when in fact we raised our concerns directly with China at military, diplomatic and political levels. And we now see gunboat diplomacy being added to the litany of war talk from the opposition. Such rhetoric does not make Australians safer. Chair, the Albanese government is also approaching the United States with the same maturity that the Australian people expect. President Trump's America First agenda envisages a different role for America in the world, and that is what the American people have chosen. Australians should be confident in our ability to come together and navigate these changes in our national interest. In addition to the extensive engagement by our ambassador in Washington, the Prime Minister has had 2 productive phone calls with the President. I was the first Australian Foreign Minister ever invited to attend a presidential inauguration, where I also met Secretary of State Rubio on his first day in office bilaterally and at the Quad Foreign Ministers meeting. The Deputy Prime Minister was Secretary Hegseth's first international counterpart to meet with him following his confirmation. And this week, the Treasurer met with his counterpart, US Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent. President Trump campaigned on change, and none of us should try to minimise the implications of this change. Australians can see from the experiences of other countries in recent weeks how broad these implications can be. And Australians will not thank politicians who recklessly try to score political points. This same recklessness has serious implications for us at home. We see some global conflict, hatred and division refracted into our country. We all want to end the scourge of anti-Semitism, of Islamophobia and of violence extremism. We must safeguard who we are. We must not allow these conflicts to be reproduced here. As ASIO Director General Mike Burgess has said, we all need to watch our language because there is a direct connection between inflamed language, inflamed tension and violence. We all means all of us, including in this room. Our job is to turn the temperature down and not dial it up. As Australians, we have to preserve our capacity to disagree peacefully. We have to preserve our capacity to argue respectfully. Our government is working to bring people together at home whilst using our respected voice abroad to advocate for an end to the cycle of violence. In closing, I want to thank the Department, all its staff here and throughout the world at our post for the work they've undertaken since the last estimates.
Thanks a lot, Minister. Assuming you're happy to table that speech for us?
Happy.
Yep, and we'll circulate that to senators. Now, Secretary, did you have an opening statement?
Chair, yes, please, with your indulgence.
Yes, sure.
Thank you. Senators, thank you for the opportunity to make an opening statement. Since the last estimates hearings, my department has been focused on advancing Australia's interests against a backdrop of a challenging international environment. This week marks the 3rd anniversary of Russia's illegal and immoral invasion of Ukraine. We've made clear that Australia stands shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine, and we continue to support the Ukrainian people, committing more than $1.5 billion in assistance. Turning to the Middle East, the ceasefire and hostage deal agreed in January are steps towards peace and stability for Israelis awaiting desperately the safe return of loved ones and Palestinians in dire need of humanitarian assistance. Australia continues to pursue our long-standing policy of working with the international community towards a 2-state solution, a Palestinian state and the State of Israel living side by side in peace and security within internationally recognised borders. In these increasingly challenging times, I'm proud to lead a global network that engages confidently and effectively with the world to advocate our values and deliver on our national interests. The last time DFAT appeared before this committee was the day after the US presidential election. We've moved quickly to prosecute Australia's interests with the new administration. In addition to the high-level political engagements outlined by the Foreign Minister, our ambassador to the United States has spoken with President Trump, and the embassy has developed extensive relationships across the new administration. As the Foreign Minister has said, Australia can engage with confidence as we continue to bolster our ties with the United States Australia's principal and long-standing strategic partner. Australia's early high-level contact in the early meeting of Quad partners is a demonstration of ongoing US commitment to this region. We will continue to work with all of our global partners in proactive, collaborative and innovative ways, with a clear understanding of our national interests to make Australia and our region peaceful, stable and prosperous. This includes a commitment to the predictable rules-based international system, which remains squarely in Australia's national interest. We are working closely with Defence and our ally New Zealand to observe the PLA Navy Task Group operating near Australia. And we continue to register our concerns about dangerous and destabilising conduct in the South China Sea and the need to adhere to international law. I'd like to highlight the efforts of officials in DFAT's Office of the Pacific, who in recent months have delivered significant initiatives that build prosperity, security and resilience in our most immediate region, the Pacific. I'm particularly thinking of those involved in the government's successful treaty with Nauru, which will sustain banking services there, and separately the opportunity for Papua New Guinea to join the NRL by 2028. This, of course, is about so much more than sport. It's yet another chapter in our shared history as we celebrate PNG's 50th anniversary of independence later this year. These are important initiatives that will help cement understanding and common purpose with other members of our Pacific family. As we focus our efforts to shape the kind of region we want to share, DFAT continues to drive deeper engagement with Southeast Asia, which is vital to Australia's security and prosperity and core to our national interests. We're strengthening education, industry and community connections through the ASEAN-Australia Centre launched by the Foreign Minister in November, and continue to make significant progress in implementing the recommendations in Invested, Australia's Southeast Asia Economic Strategy to 2040. And just yesterday, the government launched the new roadmap for Australia's economic engagement with India, helping us harness the enormous trade and investment potential of the world's fastest growing major economy. I'd also like to acknowledge the professional and compassionate efforts of our consular office officials over the last few months as we continue to grapple with crises driven by events overseas. The recent Consular State of Play report highlighted a significant spike in crisis cases involving over 6,000 Australians in 23-24. Indeed, between May 22 and January 25, DFAT's Crisis Centre has been activated 10 times and we have managed 21,573 consular cases. DFAT has coordinated 6 assisted departure operations since 2022, helping Australians and their families leave Ukraine, Sudan, Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, New Caledonia, Lebanon and most recently Vanuatu, where we delivered humanitarian support and helped over 680 Australians and family members return home. Australia continues to support Vanuatu's recovery and the Minister for International Development in the Pacific is visiting Port Vila today. Finally, Senators, I'm particularly proud DFAT ranked equal first in the 23-24 Survey of Trust in Australian Public Services. DFAT services provided through the Australian Passport Office and the Consular and Crisis Management Division were rated amongst the most trusted, backed by 81% of respondents. Similarly, a high level of respondents, 78%, expressed satisfaction with DFAT services. Respondents were most satisfied with the respectful interactions they had with DFAT staff and the accuracy of the information the department provided. These results reflect our strong commitment to helping Australians both at home and abroad. Thank you, chairs and members.
Thanks, Secretary. And soon you also have to table that for us.
Yes, thanks.
Yeah, excellent. All right. Now, Senator Patterson, kick off for today.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, I haven't yet got your opening statement and I would like to ask some questions about it. Do you know if that's been circulated yet to the committee?
No, I don't know that.
It hasn't been? No. Is it going to be?
Sure. I think I made some changes as I spoke, so...
Oh, right, OK. Well, I look forward to being able to ask some detailed questions about some of the things you said in your opening statement, but just at a high level, I haven't attended every single Senate estimate since you were Foreign Minister, but I've attended a fair few, and I don't recall an opening statement as partisan as that one, nor do I recall any of your predecessors in this forum making such a partisan opening statement. Is there a reason why you felt the need to make such a strong statement this morning?
Well, I don't accept the premise of your question.
Well, have you ever opened Senate estimates by making multiple references to the Leader of the Opposition by name before?
Well, I think when... well, first, I don't accept the premise of your opening question. I think it is a reasonable thing to respond to some of the bellicose rhetoric, which I don't think is in Australia's interests.
Can you recall a time where your predecessor would have used this forum for such a partisan statement?
I've seen a lot of partisanship in this forum, Senator, including yesterday from you.
Okay. You don't think it was reasonable to ask questions about what we knew and when we knew it about the People's Liberation Army Navy Task Force?
I think it is reasonable to ask those questions. I think gunboat diplomacy is a return to the drums of war rhetoric. And I don't think it is reasonable for the Leader of the Opposition to tell people in Menzies and Bennelong he's pro-China. I don't think it's reasonable for Mr Woolahan to tell people how you've changed your position and then engage in that sort of rhetoric in Canberra. And I think that should be pointed to. You can explain it.
It comes across, I mean, I know the media was bad this morning for the government. I know a range of commentators are very critical, but it comes across as very defensive. And I know an election's around the corner, but I just can't recall a Foreign Minister feeling the need to weigh in so strongly before.
Senator, they're your words.
Okay. I will have specific questions about the statement when it is circulated, but turning to the People's Liberation Army Navy Task Force, do you have an update on its whereabouts today?
That's a matter for Defence.
We asked Defence yesterday and they said that they were briefing DFAT so that DFAT could brief you so that you were on top of it. Have you received an update from the department?
Those are operational matters for Defence, and if you want an update from Defence, I would refer you to the Deputy Prime Minister's office.
I don't have the same opportunities to ask questions of him, as you know.
Well, Senator, I don't know whether the opposition... I know that Mr Dutton was quite late to ask for a briefing on this. I don't know if you've sought a further briefing. I'm sure that if you seek a further briefing, we will provide one.
It's funny you should say that. We did ask for briefings and we had some difficulty scheduling them. I'm not sure if it was the availability of officials or some other reason. And just on that...
If I could just also say, my recollection is, and I'll check with the Defence portfolio, that there are regular statements updating in relation to this. Ms Lawson might be able to assist, or Ms Deserton.
Thank you, Senator. Ellie Lawson, Deputy Secretary, Geostrategic and Planning Group. The Department of Defence is making regular updates on their website.
Yes. Will there be an update today?
Did you not check this morning? If you were very keen. I think it went live at 8:30.
Okay, well then you should be able to answer the question.
No, it's a Defence statement, sir.
Right, so it's not in your state of knowledge?
It's a Defence statement.
Yeah, and we've been told by Defence you've been regularly briefed. If you're not aware, you can say so.
No. I refer you to the statement, which is very transparent and professional.
Is it in the state of knowledge of any officials here today?
Is what? In their state of knowledge of any officials?
The whereabouts, the current whereabouts of the People's Liberation Army Navy Task Force?
Senator, I would refer you to the update on the website of the Department of Defence.
Thank you. So is that a no? That's not in the state of knowledge of any officials?
Senator Sarah Deserton, First Assistant Secretary, Defence and National Security Policy Division. The Department of Defence issued a statement at 8:30 a.m, as the Minister referenced. It indicated that the task group was 548 kilometres west of Hobart.
Thank you. I'm grateful for that update. Foreign Minister, when were you first informed about the live firing exercise conducted by the PLAN?
As you will, or you may recall, I was in South Africa at the time.
Yes.
So the initial advice to government would have occurred very early morning I think 4 a.m. or sometime like that, or maybe earlier, South African time. So I was advised after I got up and I was briefed, and I also had a conversation with the Prime Minister in which we agreed that I would raise the issue directly with Wang Yi, Prime Minister Wang Yi, with whom I had a bilateral later that day.
Okay, so you were advised by your own department, presumably?
That's right. Possibly through the office as well as the department.
Does anyone from the department have the Australian time that the Foreign Minister would have been notified?
Senator, the department was advised by the Department of Defence at around 12:30 Australia time on the Friday. We also understand the Foreign Minister's office received a communication a bit earlier than that from her office. That was at around 2:51 a.m. Johannesburg time.
And just because I can't do the maths in my head while I'm here, what was it Australian time that the Foreign Minister's office was notified?
We understand it was around 11:50 a.m.
11:50. So it was also after the Infrastructure Minister was notified at 11:20?
It's not the Infrastructure Minister, Transport is the key portfolio there.
Well, yes, she's also the Transport Minister.
No, but that, I'm just making sure. She's not, Minister King is not notified because she's the Infrastructure Minister. She's notified because she has responsibility for air services.
I'm pretty sure the department is called the Department of Infrastructure, but anyway. So how is it that the Infrastructure and Minister for Transport is informed half an hour before the Foreign Minister office is about a live firing exercise by the People Liberation Army Navy in the Tasman Sea?
Well, Senator, you went through this in detail yesterday, including the way in which the two channels of notification occurred. So I don't think I've got anything to add to the evidence from yesterday.
Well, except that, as you pointed out, those are questions to the Department of Defence. These are the questions to you. And when you were informed or when your office was informed, now I understand if you're in a different time zone, you might not have been able to be woken up in the middle of the night. I'm not suggesting that, but your office should have been notified promptly. Why was it after the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport?
Well, I'd refer you to the evidence yesterday.
Right. Do you think it's a problem that domestic non-security ministers are finding out about serious security incidents in the region before senior national security ministers in their offices?
I'd refer you to the evidence yesterday.
That's not an answer.
Well, it is, actually. It may not be the answer you like, Senator Patterson, but it is the answer I'm giving. That the important point, though, is I was able to put our views directly to a senior member of the Chinese government within 24 hours.
I look forward to canvassing that with you in a moment, but I think the notification issue is an important one. Has there been any reflection in government about the delayed notification to senior national security ministers such as yourselves about a senior national security incident, a serious national security incident?
I'm not sure what your question is seeking to elicit.
I'll rephrase it then. Don't you think it is a problem that it took so long to inform ministers about a serious incident and that ministers who do not have national security responsibilities found out about a national security incident prior to ministers such as yourself and the Defence Minister?
Well, I think the evidence yesterday traversed in detail the two mechanisms or the two channels by which notification was provided.
Yes, and that's not what the question was. The question is whether you think it's a problem or not.
Well, I think the evidence yesterday, you asked precisely those questions and the CDF responded to you.
Yes, and now I'm asking you for your view.
And, you know, I take it, unlike those who wish to be highly critical of the Australian Defence Force in pursuit of this political objective, I take advice from national security agencies, including Defence.
Yes, well, that's interesting, but I'm not asking for their advice. I'm asking for your view. You're the Foreign Minister. You don't have a view on this?
I have many views, Senator Patterson. Most of them you don't agree with.
Please share them. This is your opportunity.
Yeah, I think you are engaging in politicisation of this event for your own political purposes. And I think people can see that.
I think people can see, and I think fair observers have pointed out, no friends of the coalition, that this has been shambolic handling of this issue over the last couple of days. Utterly shambolic. And worthy of legitimate scrutiny in a forum like Senate estimates.
Do you have a question?
I have many. I still don't have the benefit of your statement, so I'm going to have to rely on the rough notes that I took. So forgive me if they're not completely accurate, and please correct me if they're not. In talking about those two pathways of notification via a commercial airliner and the Defence Forces, I think you said it was some time later that notification came through from defence channels. Is that accurate?
I think that was the evidence yesterday.
Yes, but I'm asking about what you said in your statement before I ask a question about it. I don't want to be accused of misquoting you.
Yes.
Okay. The Prime Minister said yesterday at his press conference that it was around the same time that notification came through from the Virgin Australia pilot and the Defence Force, but you've described it as some time later. What's the reason for the discrepancy between the Prime Minister's description and yours?
I don't accept there's a discrepancy.
Do you think that around the same time and some time later are
Senator,
the same?
The time frame is clear from the evidence yesterday. We've been transparent about that.
I think you've been transparent today, as Defence was yesterday, but I don't think that's a fair description of what the Prime Minister has said, because he said yesterday at his press conference that it was around the same time that notification came through the two channels. That's not true, and that's probably why you said on Hansard, quote, some time later. Why is there a discrepancy between the two of you?
Well, I don't accept that is the case, Senator.
You don't think...
And I just would also make the point, if you were so interested in this issue, why did it take the Leader of the Opposition some 4 days after the incident before he sought a briefing?
Why was a briefing proactively offered to the media on Friday, but not the Opposition?
I'm not sure that's the case.
It is the case.
Well, hang on. You want transparency. The Deputy Prime Minister has been very transparent about this. He provided... there was a public statement issued, was it last week? I'm sorry, it wasn't my statement, but certainly before this occurred, about the task group, and an interview, and defence statements as required. I don't know how regular. So are you complaining about transparency?
No, well, you made an observation about opposition briefings, and I'm responding by observing...
Well, I just think it says something about how
Minister,
interested you are in this.
I hadn't finished, Minister.
How interested you are in this, that your leader took 4 days to even ask for a briefing on this, to even ask.
Well,
now, you know, if this is such a big issue for you, surely you would have been pretty quick to request a briefing from the government, but you weren't.
Minister, I'll do my best today not to interrupt you, and I ask that you do the same.
Okay. You're not going to be Senator McGrath?
We could all play that game. I won't run through a list of your colleagues and reflect on
No games today, please. No games today.
We just had a very,
right,
interrupting Prime Minister and Cabinet.
Let's get back to questions and answers.
So, I mean, we can have the fight about briefings all day, probably not too productive. So, you don't accept that your description of the two pathways of reporting as being some time later and the Prime Minister's description of being around the same time are in any way distinct?
I mean, this is really... When you're talking about a difference from memory of less than an hour. From memory, is that what the defence evidence said? From memory, it was 50 minutes?
I think it was 63 minutes between 50. The Virgin notification and the New Zealand Defence Force notification.
But the relevant point is their services. I think it's about 50 minutes. So you're talking less than an hour. Now, if you want to focus your attention on words used to describe less than an hour, that's a matter for you.
Okay. You also said, and I believe this is accurate, but again, I don't have your transcript, so you correct me if I'm wrong. we were not provided advance notice about the exercise. Is that right?
Senator Ellie Lawson, Deputy Secretary, Strategic Planning Coordination Group. The Department of Defence did respond to that question yesterday.
My question is not about the notice. My question is about the Foreign Minister's opening statement. I think it might have been now circulated, so I'll try and read it while I'm asking questions, but I might need to come back to it. But I think, Foreign Minister, you said in your opening statement that, quote, we were not provided advance notice. Is that what you said in your opening statement?
And what I have indicated publicly, and I think was consistent with Defence yesterday, is that the Australian Defence Force in similar circumstances, and we do operate in similar circumstances, in general would provide 12 to 24 hours advance notice.
Yes, just at the moment trying to seek the confirmation of what you said in your opening statement, and I now have it in front of me, and it says, and I quote, seeking an explanation for why we were not provided advance notice. Why are you observing that we were not given advance notice when the Prime Minister has repeatedly said that notice was given?
Well, notice was given. That I was referencing the practice of the Australian Defence Force, which form part of my representations to the Foreign Minister.
Yes, but it's not notice if it comes after the event has commenced,
Senator,
is it?
We all know what you're trying to do. I put, on behalf of the country, to the Chinese Foreign Minister that in usual we would expect I'm sorry, 24 to 48 hours advance notice. That is usually what Australians would engage in. So I'll correct my evidence from before. 24 to 48, and that's what I'm referencing in the opening statement.
What I'm trying to do is ask you questions.
So what you're trying to do is to create more politics around this, Senator. Let's be clear.
Chair, I'm trying to be respectful to the Foreign Minister by not interrupting her during her answers. Sure. I'd ask that you enforce the same when I'm asking questions. Foreign Minister, what I'm trying to do is to get you to answer questions about your own opening statements, which you delivered half an hour ago, and you seem reluctant to do that. You have said we were not provided advance notice. The Prime Minister has said in a range of media interviews and press conferences, including on Q&A on Monday night, that we were given notice of the upcoming exercises. Why is there a discrepancy between what you have said about this and what the Prime Minister has said about this?
Senator, I know you are desperate to try and find a new angle. I'm consistent. The advance notice to which I'm referencing there is the advance notice that I spoke to Foreign Minister Wang Yi about and that the Australian Defence Force would generally provide in similar circumstances.
I agree, Foreign Minister, you have been consistent in your own words, but your own words are not consistent with what the Prime Minister has
Senator,
said.
They're your
Chair, again, I'm
sorry, I thought
you'd
finished. I thought you finished. No, that's fine.
I was pausing for breath. I agree, you have been consistent in your own language, but your language has not been consistent with what the Prime Minister said, and it is in the national interest to understand why there is a discrepancy on a serious matter of national security and public statements made by the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister. So can you account for the difference between the Prime Minister's statements on many occasions saying that notice was given and your statement that we were not provided advance notice?
Well, Senator, both statements are correct.
So we were provided advance notice?
Senator, both statements are correct.
They're in contradiction with each other.
Senator, I've explained to you what I meant. You don't want to listen to it. That's a choice you want to make. I've explained to you what I was referencing by advance notice, which is what I spoke to the Foreign Minister of China about.
I'm actually listening very carefully to your answers. It's the fact that they're unresponsive to the questions that I'm asking, which is why I need to keep repeating them and seeking clarity. It is not the same thing to say we received notice and there was no advance notice provided, which is what you have said compared to what the Prime Minister has said. Is it because the Prime Minister is not across the detail?
Oh, now we've come to the point of the questioning, haven't we? To try and land the political grab in estimates. You're not actually interested in the detail. If you were interested in how we are working to keep Australians safe, you would have asked for a briefing less than 4 days after the incident happened. All right? But you're only interested in trying to invest in a political attack. And everyone can see that, Senator Patterson. Everyone can see that.
Prime Minister, I won't be taking lectures from you on politicisation, given that you made an opening statement that is the most partisan in memory in Senate estimates and repeatedly attacked the Leader of the Opposition by name multiple times. And by my search, you mentioned him 3 times in your opening statement along with others. It is in the public interest to understand why the Prime Minister has inaccurately, repeatedly described the behaviour of a People's Liberation Army Navy task group in our region.
Senator, I think the facts demonstrate China did give notice. It was not in accordance with best practice, and it wasn't given directly to Australia or New Zealand. And the fact that it did not do so to New Zealand, Australia, or in advance was something I raised with Foreign Minister Wang Yi. So it is correct that China gave notice. We have issues with the timeframe around that and the channel, and we have expressed that to them.
How did they give notice if we only learned of the exercises after they had commenced?
Senator, I believe Defence covered this in their committee hearing yesterday. My understanding is that there was notice given, but it was not through the best practice channels that are normally used. It was not a formal notice to mariners, and so it was not given directly to Australia or New Zealand.
I think the plain language understanding of giving notice is telling someone about something before it happens, not after it started. How is it giving notice if we only find out about it after it started?
And Senator, that is why we have raised this directly with the Chinese government, because in our view, this was not best practice, and so it caused disruption. And so our expectation is that these kinds of exercises are formally notified in accordance with international best practice.
Last minute, Senator Patterson.
Thank you. Just final question on this for now. Prime Minister, will the Prime Minister apologise today for misleading the Australian people about this serious matter of national security?
Well, that is not what has occurred.
All right. I'm going to move the call around. Now I'm going to go to Senator Green and then Senator Steele-John afterwards. Senator Green, you've got the call.
Thank you, Chair. I'm also very interested in security in our region, Minister, and that's why I have questions about the Pacific.
Thank you.
Minister, can you start by outlining to the committee the state of Australia's relationships in the Pacific when we came to government?
I'm tempted to hand this to Ms Peake, but it probably would be a bit unkind to ask her to answer this.
I have plenty of questions for Ms Peake.
Well, Senator, I think you would know before the last election what we saw in the Pacific from the Morrison-Dutton governments. We saw vacating the space. We saw, frankly, disrespectful language. It is still raised with me when I visit the Pacific, Mr Dutton's comments about water lapping at your door. We saw $11.8 billion in aid cuts. Oh, might have been more, can't recall what it was at the end of the day. We saw the coalition having lectured the Pacific, mocked their priorities and joked about the threat of climate change, a lack of respect for the Pacific family. Trust in Australia was at an all-time low, and I have said publicly Australia lost the opportunity through those years to be the only partner of choice. And Australia's security continues to pay the price of the coalition's neglect.
And that vacuum that you speak of, Minister, how did our government set about repairing those relationships and trying to, I guess, fill that vacuum that had been left?
Well, as I've outlined in the snapshot which was released today, the immediate priority when we came to government was to engage with our region and to repair and rebuild the relationships in our region. The day we were sworn in, the Foreign Minister and I went to Tokyo to attend the Quad meeting. I returned to Australia and then I flew directly from Australia to Fiji, where I gave a speech at the Pacific Islands Forum. Is it called the Secretariat? The whole, the Secretariat, which was obviously was a very important engagement. I'd also issued a video immediately after swearing in to the Pacific to express our commitment to the relationships, and I said we would listen and we would act on their priorities. And I had a single objective, which is that, we will work with you. We'll work with you respectfully. We'll listen to what you want, and we will be a respectful and substantial partner. I made a commitment also that I would visit every member of the Pacific Islands Forum in the first year, as well as every member of ASEAN except Myanmar, obviously, which was to try and underscore or to emphasise our intent. And we kept that commitment. We've worked very hard to repair relationships. We've made some very significant achievements, and I want to echo the Secretary's recognition of the work that Ms Peake and her team have engaged in, both here but also in country. What are some of the things we've done? Well, first, as the Prime Minister says, climate change credibility is the entry ticket for positive diplomatic engagement in the Pacific. Obviously we take climate change seriously. We've legislated our 2030 target and net zero by 2050. We have progressed our integration agenda, our engagement agenda. We have the historic Whalapili Union Treaty with Tuvalu, which I know you have been interested in, Senator. We have signed a new treaty with Nauru. The Secretary spoke about that. We partnered with the Papua New Guinean government to support their entry into the NRL. This was a personal commitment of the Prime Minister to Prime Minister Marape, who obviously was very keen to progress that commitment, which is it is a sport, it is people to people, it is deep cultural links, it is part of what we share. We have a bilateral security agreement with Papua New Guinea, which is now in force. We have entered into agreement with Solomon Islands to grow their police force, which is bringing Australia back into that trusted partner role with Solomon Islands, a position that was lost under the coalition. We've brought two major regional initiatives to life. The Pacific Policing Initiative, and I want to acknowledge not just the work of the department but also the AFP, who have done such good work in that area. And we're very pleased to work very closely with them, and the Pacific Response Group. And these two, these two initiatives aim to increase the capability and resilience of the Pacific to respond to crises within the Pacific family. We've brought people closer together through the Labour Mobility Scheme and implementing the Pacific Engagement Visa, and we have all of these are achievements which are possible because of the trusted relationships the government has with the Pacific family, and more importantly, or as importantly, They are Australia being responsive and respectful to the priorities which are articulated by Pacific leaders and representatives. I would say, Senator, I'm sorry, this is a long answer. It's an area I'm very passionate about.
Covering off a lot of my questions.
I've described the situation in the Pacific as permanent contest.
Yeah.
So we are not where we were 20 years ago. We have to be realistic. We are in what I've described as permanent contest. I'd make the point that there is a direct relationship between Australia's security and the way in which, and stability and safety with the way in which governments engage with the Pacific. And it is the case that disrespect and disregard and disengagement left Australia less secure and safe.
Thanks, Minister. I've got some questions about some of those treaties that you mentioned. There's been a lot. There's been a number of milestones, but there's some particular ones I wanted to ask about. Firstly, the Nauru-Australian Treaty. I understand that was signed in December. How did it come about, and what is the, what is the key part of that agreement? How does it differ from the treaty with Tuvalu?
Thanks for the question, Senator. Elizabeth Peake, Head of the Office of the Pacific. Senator, as you say, we had the great pleasure of signing the Nauru-Australia Treaty between our Prime Minister and President Adiang in December. This was a treaty that had quite a long gestation. Nauru requested that we consider elevating our relationship through the auspices of a treaty as early as 2022. And we had looked to meet their priority interests, which is really economic resilience. The key interest that the Nauruan government had expressed to us was to ensure stable banking services with the departure of Bendigo Bank that was foreshadowed. Also, a small country has few revenue sources and they're looking for fiscal certainty in the longer term. They're also concerned about the security of our region and look for security assurances too. So through the Nauru-Australia Treaty, we were able to work on all of those fronts, able to provide a legally binding commitment that we would have a sustainable banking solution for Nauru, and the Commonwealth Bank has indicated that it will take over financial services for Nauru and ensure that they're connected to the international financial system. We also were able to provide, over 5 years, $100 million for fiscal certainty and $40 million for augmenting security in Nauru, particularly focused on Nauruan police. We were able to mutually agree security assurances as well, so that we had certainty over activity in the security sector of Nauru as well as key critical infrastructure sectors.
Sorry, I'm very conscious of the time. I might have to get cut off in a little bit, but I just want to pick up on what you just mentioned and more broadly, as I haven't had the same engagement that the Foreign Minister has with countries around the Pacific, but from the engagement I have had, I understand that policing is such an important issue. I wanted to ask about that specifically because you mentioned it as part of the treaty, but more broadly, Minister, the Solomon Islands signed a policing MOU with China when the coalition was last in power. That describes the state of the situation when we came to government. Can you tell us about the context of that MOU and what Australia has done to fill that void?
Well, the position the government's taken is that it is in the interest of stability in the region for security to be provided from within the Pacific family, so that it is members of the PIF who can work with each other to provide security. And that is the view we have taken. The reality is the weaker presence in the region, the weaker relationships, for all of the reasons I've outlined, that was in existence during the Morrison-Dutton years, left space for others to engage in a sector that we regard as important to our collective security in the Pacific.
And to where we are now, I understand that there's been, the Prime Minister in December announced a package of support for the Solomon Islands Police Force. I mean, I guess that's in addition to the work that the AFP is doing, the broader policing initiatives, but important leading into PIF. I think the Solomons are hosting PIF this year. So
security, domestic security is obviously an issue not just for Solomon Islands but for many countries in the Pacific. So one of the priorities of this term of government has been how is it we can best enable the provision of security assistance and support from within the PIF. Hence, we have bilateral arrangements with certainly Solomon Islands, and we have a regional arrangement, which is the Pacific Policing Initiative. It might be useful for Ms Peake just to talk to you about what the Solomon Islands agreement the Prime Minister engaged in did, which is obviously a much more, from Australia's interest, a much better position. It's a much better position for the relationship than existed previously.
thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Yes, the Prime Minister announced that we would provide $190 million to support a strengthening and growing in size and capability of the Royal Solomon Islands Police Force. This has been a priority request from the Solomon Islands government, and Prime Minister Manelli has described that a three-tiered framework, that Solomon Islands would like to take care of its security by having a strong domestic police force. If it requires support, it would go to its Melanesian partners, and further support, it would go to Pacific Island Forum members. So again, reinforcing that idea that the security is a shared responsibility for our region, and we're proud to be the primary security partner in the Solomon Islands and to continue what is a very long history of supporting the Solomon Islands Police Force.
Yeah, thank you. That's a big turnaround in relationships, but the Chair's going to wrap me up. I'm going to come back to my other questions, I believe, later on. Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Senator Green. Now, Senator Stiljohn, hello. You've got the call.
Yeah. My first question will go to Minister Wong, and staying with our region and the Asia Pacific. There's been some quite significant concern expressed by Malaysia in relation to the upholding of international law. They recently joined a coalition alongside South Africa and many other nations, the Hague Group, with a shared commitment to ensure that the international law functions of the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, continue to be respected, making clear the statement that no nation is above international law. Likewise, Indonesia has been very clear in its statements around the importance of ICC warrants being executed if a nation has the opportunity to do so. In November of last year, the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for one Hamas commander and two Israeli leaders, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defence Minister Gallant. And I note that your response on behalf of the Australian government reiterated that the Australia, in your view and under this government, respects the independence of the ICC. I have some questions about our position on these warrants. Firstly, what action is Australia taking to place diplomatic pressure on the State of Israel to comply with these arrest warrants?
Senator, I'm not. I don't propose to add in relation to this to what I've said previously. I've spoken about Australia supporting the independence of the ICJ, respecting the independence of the ICJ and the ICC. I've said that in relation to the ICC, we don't propose to speculate on hypotheticals and decisions in relation to those issues, including the issues you go to, would be decisions for the Attorney General.
Just to clarify, Minister, my question goes to directly to your statement, where you have reiterated Australia's respect for the ICC. I'm well aware of your previous statements in estimates and exchanges in relation to specific warrants. My question is, what diplomatic pressure has Australia applied to the State of Israel to encourage their compliance with those warrants?
Well, 2 points, Senator. I think Australia's been very clear in its position in relation to international law, including through multiple joint statements with other partners and our position at the United Nations alongside the great majority of our partners and like-mindeds. I don't propose to go any further in relation to what I've said before. I would say to you, Senator, there is obviously a ceasefire in place, as fragile as it is. I think we all want that ceasefire to hold, and we would urge all parties to comply with their obligations under the ceasefire.
Can I ask the department, I think it would be for the department, has the Australian ambassador to Israel made representations to the State of Israel regarding compliance with these warrants?
Good morning, Senator Craig McLaughlin, Deputy Secretary, International Security, Legal and Consular Group. Senator, the Ambassador in Tel Aviv has had ongoing discussions with the Israeli authorities on a range of matters, including international legal matters, since the 7th of October, including to underscore the Australian government's interest in the nature of the conflict, the ongoing conflict, particularly in Gaza, to underscore the importance of humanitarian aid getting into Gaza, and of course to support the Israeli government in its efforts to ensure that the hostages that were taken by Hamas in their attack on 7 October are returned.
Thank you. And you've just outlined for us a number of issues at play in relation to international law there. Specifically on this issue, has the Ambassador raised the issue of compliance with warrants issued by the International Criminal Court?
Senator, I don't have anything to add to this point.
Okay, thank you. Minister, as we see from the coalition, the Hague group that has been joined by Malaysia, a key regional ally, and as many have observed in relation to the position of Indonesia, as articulated by its foreign minister. The question of equal and just enforcement of international law and respect for international law is very much at the forefront of the mind of our regional neighbours. Your statement in relation to this question has been to reiterate the respect for the independence of the ICC held by the government and quote its important role in upholding international law. I acknowledge that that is the statement that you have made previously. It does not clarify, has not yet clarified, the question of whether Australia would execute warrants if given the opportunity to do so. And I've read your previous commentary in relation to not wanting to comment on such hypotheticals. That does put us out of step with some of our closest regional partners. Prime Minister Luxon of New Zealand made a very similar statement to yourself, however added critically that they would be obligated to do so in relation to the execution of those warrants. It is concerning to many people that we seem to have landed out of step with the rather calm and considered responses of our regional neighbours. Can you reassure the community that we would in fact execute those warrants today, as we are obligated to as a signatory to the Rome Statute and the relevant international law covenants that empower the court?
It's a very long question, Senator, and a lot of aspects to it. In relation to the last bit, Australia supports international law. Australia recognises the independence of the ICC and the ICJ. I've said that repeatedly. In relation to the warrants issue, both the Attorney General and I have said that that is a hypothetical question. Obviously, we don't intend to be drawn on the hypothetical question. It is the case that we have differences of opinion on some issues with our friends and neighbours in parts of ASEAN, not all, I would note. Some members of ASEAN have a different view. Australia determines its own foreign policy position.
Okay. Moving to the topic of President Trump's America First agenda, as you referenced in your opening statement, the US has withdrawn from the World Health Organization. Given this, has Australia set up any channels with the US to coordinate public health responses?
Australia remains a member of the WHO.
Absolutely, and the United States is withdrawing, has withdrawn from that organisation. So my question is, have you set up any alternative channels with the US to coordinate public health responses?
Senator Jamie Smith, the Acting Deputy Secretary of the Development, Multilateral and Europe Group. Yes, as you said, the Trump administration has indicated its withdrawal from the WHO. As you know, Australia has and continues to be a strong partner with the World Health Organization. We are engaging with like-mindeds, with countries in our region about how we continue to support and address health needs. The Australian government's also, for the Department of Health, taking on the chair of the World Health Organization later this year, and we'll continue to work with partners to look at how we address and continue to support health needs and health security globally.
Thank you for that. But just to be clear, the current US population, what's the department's estimation of the current US population? Is it roughly 340 million? individuals?
Senator, I'll take your...
There or thereabouts. I've just quickly looked it up so that I can frame this properly. Like whether or not the US is a formal member of the World Health Organization, I personally wish they were and long hope that we continue to be. It is one of the not only key economic global hubs, but also population hubs and transport points. No global response to a public health crisis is practically possible without coordination with the United States, and information in relation to public health matters of concern in the US are still deeply relevant to Australia, whether or not they are in the WHO. So my question to you is, they have left. What have we done to make sure that there are any channels of communication in relation to public health matters of concern within the United States, so that we are aware of what is going on that may be relevant to our public health here in Australia?
I'll pass to my colleague Lucas Otoka, who's a Global Health Ambassador for DFAT.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary. Lucas Otoka, Ambassador for Global Health. There are a number of channels where engagement still happens. The quad that the Minister referenced to in her opening statement that met on the first day of Secretary Rubio's activity has a health security partnership that focuses on the 4 countries working for a stronger health security system for the Indo-Pacific. There's a number of technical meetings and other arrangements that happen in different levels within and outside of WHO, where there's been some participation of US officials, and we will continue to monitor the situation through our post in DC and through the channels where both the US and Australia are represented, to see what, after the review that is underway and some of the early orders come into effect, including the periods that they were ascribed to that, finalised, to see what modes of engagement remain. Important to note as well that in the withdrawal order, the US signalled an interest to maintain their engagement in the global health architecture through those or other channels.
Okay. Chair, I'm aware I'm coming close to my time. I've just got 2 other questions.
You are in time, but now one.
One. All right. I will economise. Minister, there is understandable concern in many parts of the Australian community that has been triggered by certain statements by President Trump in relation to US intentions in relation to potential, I can't even believe that this is something that we have to say now, but the potential of a US military action or invasion of Greenland or Panama. Can you provide us reassurance today that Australia would condemn such an action and would prevent Australian troops being sent to or in any way enabling such a flagrant violation of international law?
Senator, you know that's a hypothetical question. But what I would say is, Australia will determine our foreign policy position.
Remarkable. It is remarkable to see how far the alliance goes, that we can't just assure Greenland that we wouldn't be part of that. Poor old Denmark.
All right, we'll take
All right,
the
thanks.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much,
yeah.
Senator. Just checking the time. Actually, no. Okay, so Senator Patterson has the call, and then I'll come back to Senator Green.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, I want to come to your meeting with China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi in South Africa. You said in your opening statement that you told him that the Australian Defence Force...
The opening statement of the meeting?
Your opening statement from this Senate estimates?
No, sorry, I had opening remarks as well at the meeting. Sorry,
Okay.
I don't know which one you're referring to.
So you said in your opening statement to Senate estimates this morning that you told the Foreign Minister that the Australian Defence Force would provide at least 12 hours notice in such circumstance. Is that what you told him?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Of course. In your opening statement this morning, you said that you told China's Foreign Minister that you would provide at least 12 hours notice, that Australia would provide at least 12 hours notice. Is that what you told him?
I've just looking at the opening remarks to the media, with the media there, and I think there I simply spoke about expectations around safe and professional military conduct. I'll just have to get some advice about the range of hours that I referenced, which was consistent with the advice from Defence.
Mm. But you said 12 hours notice this morning. As officials have pointed out, as Ms Lawson said, that's not the correct best practice. As the ADF pointed out yesterday, it's 24 to 48 hours. So I just want to establish what it was that you told Wang Yi.
Yeah, and I've just said I'll need to get some advice if we could come back to it.
Okay, thank you.
Because I'm just trying to recall the range that was that we discussed in the meeting.
Was anybody in that meeting here today? Ms Lawson, you were there. So from your memory, do you remember what the Foreign Minister told Wang Yi?
Senator, my recollection was 12 to 24, and we have clarified with Defence that that is an appropriate time frame in line with international best practice.
But you yourself just said before, earlier, in helping to correct Senator Wong, that it was 24 to 48, not 12 to 24.
Senator, I think there have been references to 24 to 48 hours in other places, but I think 12 to 24, my understanding is that is an appropriate time frame to expect.
Admiral Johnson was very clear about this. He's the Chief of Defence Force. He's a naval officer. He repeatedly said yesterday 24 to 48 hours. I can't remember on any occasion him saying 12 hours. Are you sure it's 12 hours?
I would need to clarify that with Defence.
It would be a problem if we've given the Chinese Foreign Minister the wrong best practice timeframe, wouldn't it?
Well, I think the I would get the ROC checked. My recollection is, as Ms Lawson has said, which is 12 to 24. Obviously, more is better.
Yes, and the CDF was very clear that ADF best practice is 24 to 48. He did not say 12 to 24.
Well, I'm not... The Australian Defence Force operates at world's best practice in these circumstances. But whatever, we do not regard the notice that China gave as adequate. We've made that clear.
Who provided advice to you in preparation for that meeting and told you that it was 12 to 24 and not 24 to 48?
Senator, the advice that came to us from the Department of Defence was focused on the fact that China did not issue a formal notice to mariners. The time frame of that we will double check, but this is the key point, is that the formal notice to mariners was not made. That should be made directly to the Australian Defence Force. That is the critical point.
We're in agreement on that. That is critical, but it's also important that, as I've heard the Foreign Minister say many times, on the international stage we speak with one voice, and we are not speaking with one voice if we're giving different timeframes to describe best practice and what our ADF does. The CDF was very clear, it's 24 to 48. Where did 12 to 24 come from?
Senator, we will double check the advice that was provided close to immediately after the incident occurred. This was a very high-level representation conveying the clear message to the Chinese government that a formal notice to mariners did not occur. We will double check the advice about the timeframes, but the critical message, as I say, is that our assertion and our clear position is that China did not follow international best practice, and that message was conveyed very clearly at that meeting.
I understand, but it's actually not very clear if we're giving different numbers. Sorry, Foreign Minister.
So, I'll make 2 points. The basis of our expectations of notice are clear. I think yesterday there was evidence that the RAN conducted a live firing exercise earlier this year and lodged a notice to airmen mariners around 24 hours in advance with Air Services Australia. The notice included dimensions of where the live firing would occur, confirmation that firings would not take place within 10 nautical miles of known air routes or air activity. The notice also includes instructions for civil aircraft in the area to maintain a listening watch and to respond to requests for identification. Now, Australia, where we have large scale exercise, and I think this was covered yesterday, there is a more extensive and consultation and notification practice, for example, for something like Talisman Sabre. I think the Defence Force covered this yesterday. Deputy Prime Minister on radio this morning made the point that whilst what China engaged in did comply with international law, that this was not the standard by which Australia operates. He said at the end, we would, in the live firing event, be giving 12 to 24, sometimes 48 hours notice. But what I would say is I presented to Wang Yi what I was advised in terms of notice to make those representations, but the detail of what that notice should include is something that would need to be resolved between Defence.
Sure. I have no doubt, Prime Minister, that whatever you're advised you would have faithfully conveyed. I'm not suggesting otherwise, but I do want to understand what was advised, and I understand officials have taken that on notice. But you just said that the Defence Minister said on radio this morning 12 to 24 hours. Again,
sometimes 48. I think this is this is what has been sent to me is what he said publicly.
Yep. Again, I don't doubt that.
But my point is.
Sorry, Prime Minister, I haven't finished asking my question.
No. But I just wanted to be clear. My point, the point I was making, is there is a distinction between what we might do, as the RAN did for a live firing exercise, and what we might do for a much larger exercise.
Okay. Well, my memory of the evidence yesterday is that the ADF was very clear that best practice is 24 to 48. You just said that the DPM said on radio this morning 12 to 24 and sometimes 48. Is he also at odds with Defence's best practice advice?
No.
Well, it seems that way based on the evidence they gave yesterday. No one ever said 12 hours yesterday. They said 24 to 48.
Well, Senator, you need to put to CDF the different circumstances.
No, I don't have the opportunity to do that because they appeared yesterday, but when I asked him, he was clear and he said it repeatedly. If it does emerge that you've conveyed the wrong advice to Foreign Minister Wang, will you correct the record, and how will you do so?
What do you mean correct the record?
Well, if you've given a foreign government the wrong advice about Australian best practice, it would need to be clarified, surely.
Senator,
my recollection is that the advice to us was 12 to 24 hours. My understanding is that, as the Foreign Minister has said, it depends on the nature of the exercise. We will need to clarify with Defence why it is that there were different timeframes provided to us and provided in the hearing. But that is a matter for Defence to answer why sometimes it's 12 to 24 and sometimes it's 24 to 48. It's something that we will have to ask Defence to clarify with us.
Yes, and I appreciate if you can clarify that for us on notice as promptly as you can, noting that obviously if the Prime Minister calls an election soon, which he may do, the Parliament will be prorogued and questions on notice are effectively cleared. So I'd be grateful if you could do it before then, because I think it's important for the public record that it's accurate. Just to the substance of the meeting with Foreign Minister Wang, is the only concern you raised with him about this conduct the lack of notice, or did you raise other concerns?
Senator, we don't go into the details, obviously, of diplomatic discussions. You would be aware that the Minister did brief media further to that meeting and covered the range of issues that you would expect, including consular matters, human rights, our expectations around safe and professional military conduct, as well as the Middle East, Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, the Pacific, and the sovereignty rules and laws that matter to Australians.
Thank you, Ms Lawson, but the Foreign Minister has already gone into some detail about the concerns that she raised with Foreign Minister Wang, and it only relates, as per this opening statement this morning, to lack of notice. And so what I'm seeking to understand is, are they the only grounds that the Foreign Minister raised concerns, or were there other issues of concern about this activity that were raised?
Senator, the key concern that we have around this activity is the lack of notice provided.
So no concerns were raised about the 49 civilian aircraft that had to divert their route at short notice because of these activities?
Senator, as you would expect, and as per Defence's evidence yesterday, we did consider this incident to be disruptive. Hence, you know, the desire for formal notification, and as you would expect, we did raise that that fact with the Chinese government.
Right. So the specific issue of 49 flights being diverted was raised with Foreign Minister Wang.
Senator, I'm not going to go into details about diplomatic discussions. It would be counterproductive.
I thought.
I'm happy to say publicly.
Please.
I'm happy to say publicly, though, that obviously the reason notice should be given in more substance and with more time frame than was, in part is for transparent reasons of transparency, and also not to cause undue alarm or commercial disruption. And you know, that is our position, and you would anticipate, I think I might have said that publicly, that we would reflect that position in our engagements.
So is that confirmation that you did raise the specific issue of flight diversions, 49 flight diversions with Wang Yi?
No, what I'm saying is that is our position, and you should anticipate that our diplomatic engagements reflect the Australian government position.
Why can't you say?
That's because we don't do that, Senator. We don't do verbatim everything that is in a meeting. I, in fact, have been much more transparent than many foreign ministers about what is discussed in meetings, because I think it is reasonable for topics. But what I'd say to you is the reason that advance notice and substantive notice should be given is in part transparency, but also commercial disruption.
I thought that you might say that about not disclosing the details of diplomatic engagements, and I direct you to a transcript of the Prime Minister on the 3rd of April 2024, where he recounts in quite some detail a conversation he had with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu relating to the IDF's accidental killing of the Australian aid worker Zomi Frankham. In that press conference, he not only outlines at length and in detail the issues that he raises, he also discloses Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's responses repeatedly. Why is it okay for the Prime Minister to disclose both sides of a phone conversation with a foreign head of government, but it's not okay for you to tell me what you said in a meeting with Wang Yi?
Is this in relation to the death of an Australian?
Yes.
Well, so can we agree not to treat with respect a conversation about the death of an Australian? Could we at least agree that, Senator?
Of course we should be respectful to Ms Frankham and her family for what was an utterly tragic death. But what I'm asking you about is the Prime Minister's public comments about his engagement with a foreign leader. Well, in that instance, he disclosed details about it. In this instance, you're refusing to. If this is a hard and fast diplomatic rule, then why are you not willing? Why is he able to breach it but you are not?
Well, Senator, a few comments. That's one of those cross-examination statements where you take one incorrect proposition, another incorrect proposition, and then put it as an inconsistency. So let's be very clear, I don't agree with the way you've construed the question for your cross-examination political purposes. And I've done it before, so in that chair or this chair here, so I'm aware of what you're doing. But what I would say to you is This was my 9th meeting with Foreign Minister Wang Yi, and I was able to engage with him rather than just write a letter, because there is engagement. You were never able to put your views directly to him or to his counterpart. Right? So let's be clear. Secondly, I do think it's important that various topics which are raised are disclosed. I do that at a high level so that Australians can get a sense of the way in which we're seeking to manage, including the differences in the relationship, that we do raise issues such as those Ms Lawson referred to, including human rights. The Australian government position in relation to notices, as I've outlined, transparency and disruption to commercial aircraft being amongst those, amongst the benefits of providing advance notice, including to mariners and airmen, as Ms Lawson has described. Senator, I would remind you that when you were in government, the PLA Navy did visit Australia, did come to Australia in June of 2019, in fact on the anniversary of Tiananmen, without notice. So I will just remind you that you are very keen to seek notice now, but no advance notice was given to the Australian public.
Foreign Minister, you are right. There was a period in the last term of government where the Chinese government refused to engage with the Australian government, but frankly I think that reflects on them and was their decision to do so, not the Australian government's decision to do so. But you are wrong when you say that there was not engagement between the Australian government and the Chinese government under the previous government. In fact, including in the last term, there was engagement for much of that term.
Well, certainly, Senator, your government warmly welcomed Chinese warships into Sydney Harbour, but didn't tell Australians until they were sailing into the harbour. So all of your questions about notice and transparency should be taken in that light.
They didn't do a live firing exercise in Sydney Harbour.
No, they visited on the anniversary of Tiananmen, which obviously, has some controversy for many, many people in Australia. So I'm just making the point that your view about the importance of notice appears to only apply on certain occasions. But it is the case. More substantive in the way that Ms Lawson described, and advance notice should have been provided.
So you spoke about your engagement with your counterpart over this issue. Why is it that the Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister has not engaged with his counterpart on the evidence of Defence officials yesterday since May or June last year following this incident or any other serious safety incidents?
Senator, in the case of these types of incidents, we do have an established procedure, which I think Defence set out yesterday, and that procedure was followed in this instance as well. We engaged with the Chinese government through military and diplomatic channels as per the established practice. I would like to reassure you, Senator, that in those engagements we did talk about disruption and clearly outlined our expectation for an advance notice in order to avoid that kind of disruption to commercial craft.
Thank you, Ms Lawson, but the Foreign Minister was just extolling the benefits of having access to our Chinese counterparts. Why hasn't the Defence Minister availed himself of the opportunity provided by that access for almost a year after either this incident or indeed the very serious safety incident a couple of weeks ago involving the P8 Poseidon in the South China Sea?
Well, Senator, first, I think you should take some responsibility for the approach that you took in government. I know it's convenient to say it's all someone else's fault, but you engaged in domestic political attack, including describing the now Deputy Prime Minister as a Manchurian candidate.
I never said that.
Well, then disavow it.
I did at the time.
Oh.
I did on Insiders 3 days later.
Your leader hasn't, has he?
Well, your leader used that phrase as well and never withdrew it.
All right, colleagues, come on, let's get
but
back to the
my
questions.
point is, I don't think anyone watching how Mr Morrison and Mr Dutton conducted the discussion of the China relationship with China between 2019 and 2022, would think they did so without that relationship being handled with an overriding objective of domestic politics. Overriding, whether it was in Australia's national interest or not. And that was my objection to it at the time. It is not that China does not do things that we disagree with. It does. As I've said, China's strategic intent hasn't changed. But we sought to stabilise the relationship, not because we thought that would remove difference, but because we understood that we have to have a more mature and considered way of dealing with difference. And that is what we've done. Now, you talk about extolling the virtues in a very dismissive way. I happen to think it is a useful thing for a country to be able to engage with one of the great powers in its region. But that's important for the Australian people. It's important not just on the economic front, but because China is a power in our region and it is a global power. We will agree on cooperate on some things. We will not agree on many things, but we have to keep engaging in Australia's interest. In relation to defence strategic dialogue that Ms Lawson spoke about, which DFAT's also engaged. I don't know if you had the opportunity to ask anything about that yesterday. It's the first such dialogue, I think, since 2019. Why do we want dialogue between defence forces, Senator? Because we want to try and avoid miscalculation. We want to try and avoid escalation. We know that defence-to-defence dialogue, military-to-military engagement is important for preserving stability and peace. That is why we do it.
Thank you. No one's suggesting that we shouldn't. We're just trying to explore how it's being utilised in Australia's national interest. I suspect the Chair's going to move the call along shortly, so just a couple of final questions on this. When you met with Wang Yi, did you seek any commitments about future conduct from the PLA in our region?
I reiterated my expectation to him. I would anticipate there will be more discussions about this, Senator.
Are there any scheduled?
Well, we have regular dialogue with the Chinese system at different levels.
Is China's activity in the Tasman Sea over the last week consistent with the stabilisation agenda?
As I said in my opening, stabilisation doesn't mean that China will not do things with which we do not agree. I mean, this is the inconsistency that's at the heart of the proposition that you've been putting. China is a great power. Its strategic intent has not changed. The only question for those either in government who seek government is how you deal with that. And I don't think war talk from senior members of the opposition is a mature way of dealing with it.
That doesn't answer my question. Is their conduct consistent with what I understood to be a shared vision of a stabilised bilateral relationship?
Well, I have answered your question, Senator. You see, you imply, and some of the commentators I've seen seem to suggest that stabilisation was a view that somehow China wouldn't do things with which we didn't agree and we wouldn't do things with which China didn't agree. That's not correct. It is a way of understanding how you maturely deal with a relationship where you have interests that at times differ, and how do you manage those differences? How do you navigate them wisely? I mean, you could. The alternative is we just yell. That doesn't keep Australians safer. So stabilisation was based on the very pragmatic assessment that there will be things on which we disagree. China will disagree with us and we will disagree with China. but we are better off if we engage about them.
No one is arguing against engagement, Senator Wong. I'm just seeking to understand, and I'd take it from your answer, that you accept that even while pursuing a stabilisation agenda, that we will have incidents like this. It is consistent with a stabilised relationship to have incidents like this.
I refer to my previous answer. I mean, a stabilised relationship with China necessarily recognises that there are things China will do and that we will do that the other party does not agree with.
All right, I need to move the call along. Senator Green, you have the call. Take us to morning tea.
Well, thanks, Chair. I want to return to questions on the Pacific, if I can, and speak. Thanks, Ms Peake. On the topic of defence relationships, turning to Papua New Guinea, the Prime Minister announced the entry into force of the bilateral security treaty, which the Minister mentioned earlier, but also the Deputy Prime Minister has announced entry into negotiations for a defence treaty. Can you outline to the committee the context in which these agreements came about?
Certainly. Thank you, Senator Green. Elizabeth Peake, Head of the Office of the Pacific. As you say, we have, under our comprehensive strategic and economic partnership with Papua New Guinea, there was a commitment at leader level to progress a bilateral security agreement that was negotiated and ratified at the end of last year in December 12, if I recall correctly. What that does is set out in a legally binding manner a framework for our security cooperation, all the way from traditional security to new threats like cyber security and gender-based violence, so the full spectrum. Last Thursday, Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister Richard Marles and Defence Minister Billy Joseph from Papua New Guinea announced the commencement of negotiations on a defence treaty, as you mentioned. What this will do is drill down into our defence relationship, look to modernise and promote the integration of our defence relationship, which we judge to be a positive for the security between our two nations, but also the collective security of the region.
Thank you. Sorry, this sounds like a silly question, but why are we seeking these stronger ties with PNG? I mean, obviously Queensland literally shares a border with PNG, so it's quite obvious in one sense, but why are we seeking to specifically have stronger ties when it comes to defence?
Yeah, it's a good question, Senator. You know better than anyone the proximity. But there are those geographical reasons, but more generally our history, which means our futures are inseparable, and the security of our two nations are inseparable. So having a strong defence relationship not only brings our two nations together and supports our security, but also, as the two largest countries in the Pacific region, allows us to support the security of the Pacific region. This is very much in line with that idea that Pacific countries share a responsibility for security in our region.
The Defence Treaty, how does it interact with the bilateral security agreement? And is the security agreement a legally binding document?
So the bilateral security agreement is a legally binding document. Both Prime Minister Albanese and Prime Minister Marape have that very clearly on the record, and that was the intention the whole way through the negotiations. It's, as I mentioned, an overarching agreement that covers the whole spectrum of security issues, and contemplated in the bilateral security agreement was further agreements on specific issues of security. This is the first expression of that, and unsurprisingly focuses on defence, which is really the the foundation of our security relationship.
And on to very important matters, NRL. And I say that as someone from Queensland where NRL is very important, but the announcement of PNG's entry into the NRL also has made headlines in December. Look, I didn't mean to be flippant in my preamble. This is really important for PNG, but how does this initiative also help Australia?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. It is a unifying force for Papua New Guinea as a nation, as Prime Minister Marape has expressed. Well, it's also a unifying force between Papua New Guinea and Australia. We share, as two nations, this love of sport, and when we can integrate at all levels, it's an expression of our broader approach to the Pacific, which is to use our comparative advantages, such as close connections through sport, to ensure that our whole relationship is one that's mutually beneficial. And when Prime Minister Albanese and Prime Minister Marape joyously launched the idea of a PNG team into our NRL in December, it was acknowledged that this is underpinned by a foundation of trust, indeed strategic trust. So it's in our interest to have a close relationship that's founded on strategic trust in the context of the permanent contest, which the Foreign Minister outlined earlier. We need to come together with our close partners to face the challenges that we see in the world.
And sport is a great way to do that. It was announced in December, but it's been a long-term goal. And I remember when the Prime Minister spoke to the Parliament in Papua New Guinea, he was really clear about the team being based in Papua New Guinea. There's different views about that in my hometown of Cairns, but I think that is also the right decision. Why is it important that PNG has its own team, something that they can call their own, and how do you think it will? How do you think that will improve the relationships?
Thank you, Senator Green. It's important for PNG to have its own team because it is, as I mentioned earlier, this expression of national unity. It's perhaps the most diverse country in the world. It has over 700 languages. So rugby league is a unifying force, and so to have a team is a way for the whole country to come together and the whole country to be unified, which of course is in Australia's interests, being such a close neighbour.
Thank you. If I can go, I might just go a little bit off script and say there's other sports that are played in the Pacific as well. What other work do we, I mean, look, as a footballer, I know that soccer is also the national sport of some of the countries that we have relationships with. The Office of the Pacific is doing more work around sport diplomacy, as it would be called.
You're absolutely right, Senator Green. We have relationships across many sporting codes. Soccer is one, and you'll remember we hosted many Pacific nations in the margins of the Women's World Cup for soccer in 2023. We have relationships on netball, AFL, and we're looking forward to the Brisbane Olympic Games and supporting Pacific Island country athletes to pursue paths to be able to compete actively in those games as well as regional games. So it's comprehensive. It's certainly not a rugby league only strategy.
Yeah. Ms. Peake, the other thing we have in common with the Pacific is our big, beautiful oceans, and how many people around the world want to come and visit them. We were recently in Brisbane with President Whipps, and there was an announcement during that trip around support that the government is giving for direct flights to Palau. Can you talk to us about why that announcement, what was that announcement, and why was it important for Palau?
Thank you, Senator Green, and thank you for lending your support to that announcement in Brisbane. It's a direct flight from Brisbane to Palau, and It's important for Palau's tourist industries and to support its economic resilience, but it's also part of our broader objective, which is to bring all Pacific Island countries closer.
Yeah.
In the past, our approach had been very much focused on the South Pacific rather than the North Pacific, but we're focused on ensuring unity through the Pacific Island Forum and all of its members, of which Palau is a very active member. And so bringing our peoples closer together supports that broader objective of unity in the region.
And flight's obviously important for tourism, but trade as well for parts of the north of the Pacific.
Absolutely, absolutely. Building that economic resilience is fundamental to their longer term viability and sustainability.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask, just turning to another topic, staying on Pacific, if I can finish this, so hopefully the chair doesn't cut me off. Minister, if I can ask you about the initiatives in the Pacific broadly. Why is it so important that we have a presence in all parts of the Pacific? And what are some of the risks for Australia if our development presence went backwards under a future government?
So I'm just trying to think about where to start on that. I think it's important to recognise what development funding is and what it does in terms of our relationship, but obviously more broadly, there's a humanitarian imperative that if you can make sure more children grow up healthy, you reduce the number of children dying, that's a good thing for humanity. But there is a very real national interest as well for us to ensure, one, that we maximise the development and security and stability of our region, and secondly, that we don't vacate the space for others to fill. So it is very important to recognise that to keep Australia safe and secure, you have to utilise all arms of national power. That includes military capability, military presence, military relationships. It includes the sorts of agreements that Ms Peake and I have spoken about. But it also includes our diplomatic engagement, our relationships, and our place as a trusted partner. And we have a lived experience of what occurred after cuts to aid and disengagement from and disrespect of the Pacific under the previous government. And that directly impacts on Australian security and the stability of our region. It is in our interest to do everything we can in a much more competitive environment to continue to be a partner of choice. It is in our interest to continue to work together with Pacific partners to meet the needs of the region. We lost a decade in the Pacific, and we should not willingly and voluntarily lose it again, because it is our interests which are impacted.
Thank you, Minister. I'm just going to go to another topic which I think is a little broader than the Pacific, but we'll see how we go. It's about what we're doing to assist our partners on cyber. It's such a big and complex issue, particularly for developing countries, but I assume around the world. The question is around what Australia is doing to support the resilience and response of our neighbours against malicious cyber activity. I know that there was a strategy around this, and I wanted to ask a few more questions from a Southeast Asia and Pacific point of view. Thanks, Mr. Dowling. Can you tell me about the strategy?
Sure. Brendan Dowling, the Ambassador for Cyber Affairs and Critical Technology. So we're in a context where cyber attacks are getting worse globally. We're seeing cybercrime rates in the Pacific and Southeast Asia and elsewhere growing at quite alarming levels. We also see nation states far more willing to use cyber as a tool of interference or coercion or disruption. In that context, many of our partner countries in the Pacific and Southeast Asia are coming from a lower base of capability to protect and defend their systems and preserve their cyber resilience. So we have made it a priority under the cyber strategy that we released in November 2023 to work with countries in the region to build up their resilience. That goes to a range of areas of assistance. We do extensive work on capacity building in Southeast Asia to build up legal frameworks, to train staff, to provide assistance to police with digital forensics. We run a new program which is doing cyber exercising throughout the Southeast Asian region to help countries understand where their gaps in infrastructure protection or the vulnerabilities in their government systems might be. And we do extensive work in the Pacific. Some of that work goes to responding to the increasing number of cyber incidents in the Pacific. We have a program we call RAPID, or otherwise sometimes referred to as flying squads, where we actually deploy staff from Australia to help Pacific countries respond and recover from major incidents. But we also do things like upgrade hardware, support cutting-edge technology in cloud computing, all in the interest of building up their ability to protect themselves from major incidents. The end game is everyone should be able to participate safely and securely in the contemporary digital world, but cyber threat actors are extremely active in the region, and so for them, countries in the region to harvest the economic benefits, the social benefits, we are working closely in partnership to build up their ability to do so safely.
And is this one of the initiatives where there's support or joint work with the AFP as well?
Yeah, under our work in both the Pacific and Southeast Asia, we work closely with the AFP on delivering capacity building work in cybercrime investigations. It's a complicated area of policing. Digital evidence is notoriously difficult to find, identify and track. So we work with the AFP to have officers throughout the region building up digital forensic investigative capabilities. And we've seen some really good dividends in that work in places like the Philippines or Fiji, where local policing authorities have been able to successfully investigate, launch prosecutions of cyber criminals, whether it be to do with scams or fraud or ransomware, or with things like online child abuse material. Building up the capacity of those police forces is really crucial to that effort.
The Cyber Rapid program that you spoke about, as I understand, it's now established as a standing capability of the region. Who's involved in those teams, and is it on the request of Pacific partners that they sort of sent in?
Yeah, that's right, Senator. The Rapid teams were essentially developed in response to requests that were coming in from the Pacific. The tempo of incidents is increasing. Both we've deployed the Rapid teams in response to cybercrime attacks, ransomware attacks that have hit hospitals or essential services, but also in response to nation-state attacks that have hit government systems in the Pacific. They are sent in the same way we do humanitarian response. If a Pacific Island nation makes a call and asks for our assistance, we deploy teams out of Canberra, both DFAT officials or officials from other government departments with expertise, alongside private sector partners under whom we have with whom we have contractual arrangements. We've been able to deploy those teams sometimes within 24 hours of an incident occurring. We've deployed them 6 times since we launched the strategy in late 2023. I'd say that that's probably at a higher tempo than we hoped or expected. It indicates that the level of disruptive attacks is increasing. I think we'll need to continue to use those teams frequently. We do find that effectively they function as surge support. So when you have a disruptive incident anywhere, it can really call upon quite limited resources in Pacific Island countries to respond to the incidents. So our staff will sit side by side with in-country people from the Pacific Island government and work with them to deliver that response and recovery effort, and also build up their ability to respond in future. So it's
That's right. I think Minister Wong just wanted to add something.
Sorry.
First, I want to say the work done by Mr Dowling and the team has been excellent. This was a very new initiative. It was an initiative in response, as he says, to the request from Pacific Island partners, but it is also a reminder about the different domains in which we have to operate to assure our security and the security of our friends and neighbours. And this is a domain which has been a vulnerability. It continues to be an area we need to work on, but we did not have this capability until 2023. And the uptake has obviously been higher than we anticipated, which says something about the way in which this domain has been an issue for many of our partners, therefore an issue for us.
Thanks a lot, Minister. Now, on that note, we're going to break for morning tea, and I'll see everyone back here in 10 minutes. Thank you.